Welcome again. We are discussing about change in organization. So we were discussing this in the very beginning that change is inevitable. Whether you like it, you don't like it, you have to go through it. When you look at change, it starts at an individual level. And as the day goes, the weeks roll, the months go by, it expands to teams and groups up to the organizational levels also. Over the years, an organization evolves to change its strategies, structures, operational methods, culture, etc. that affects its employees. Greiner, L.E. Greiner, has designed a growth model of organizational change, which is very important, organizational change and evolution, explaining the various phases of changes that an organization goes through in its life. It's important for us to know. And who is this L.E. Greiner? 1933 till date, he is currently the Professor Emeritus of Management and Organization at the University of Southern California, United States. He is especially famous for his development of what you call it as the Greiner growth model for organizations. He himself is a graduate from the University of Kansas in the US, and he did his MBA from the Harvard Business School in 1958. Continuing the same, he did his DBA in 1966. After completing his studies, Larry Greiner was employed by Harvard Business School. He has also lectured at the University of Oxford in United Kingdom, the University of Kansas, United States, and in Seed in Fontainebleau in France. Larry Greiner is the author of many management articles and books. One of his bestsellers is the book Power and Organization Development, published in 1988. Wonderful. You can definitely get hold of a copy, and I'm sure you will do justice to that. In addition to all that, he has acted as an independent consultant to many large organizations, and that is L.E. Greiner. With a tons of experience, vast knowledge, L.E. Greiner gave us a very simple structure. He said there are 5 phases of organizational growth and crisis. When I use the word crisis, right, definitely crisis derives from the Chinese word, which means dangerous opportunity. So crisis is danger and opportunity. Look at that. On one hand, if you don't know, if you stumble in your life, in your career, in your relationships, at work, it could be dangerous. But the same thing, what people see it as danger, can also be an opportunity. So look at this diagram in front of you. Stages of development on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. Every organization, when it starts in the beginning, we say a startup company, a new company that has just started, goes through a creativity phase. And every creativity phase goes through a crisis of leadership. Because everything is new, we really don't know what to prioritize, how to go about. So there is a crisis of leadership. As we settle down from the creativity phase and we're able to successfully handle the crisis of leadership, organization goes into a direction phase. Hey, now I can do so much. What direction to take? Should we do that? Should we do this? And that leads to crisis of autonomy, right? Because there is a lot of dependencies. Crisis of autonomy. And if you successfully overcome the crisis of autonomy, you move into the next stage, the delegation phase. Because organization is already growing, you need the right people to whom you can delegate role and responsibilities. But the moment you start doing that, you slip into crisis of control. Because when you delegate and expect people to perform, you realize that your centralized control systems are no more working. So you need to decentralize. So that leads to the crisis of control. And if you handle that challenge or that change successfully, you go into a coordination phase. That's why when you have too many departments, when you have operations across cities, across countries, coordination phase becomes an issue. And that leads to crisis of red tape. And if you are able to manage the crisis of red tape, that takes you to collaboration phase. And a collaboration phase of people coming together takes you to crisis of uncertainty. You notice that organization is going from one crisis to yet another crisis, to yet another crisis, to yet another crisis. There is no change. And that's whether you like it or not, every organization goes through. So let's examine each one of them in brief. The crisis of leadership. Often an individual or a small group of individuals with a clear sense of purpose provide the energy needed to start an organization. And that's the beginning. And that's the creativity phase. Some organizations later stall at the point where they have grown and become more and more complex. And that is an issue. Clear direction is required and a sense of purpose are definitely needed. If the stage is managed and survived, the growth of strong leadership and direction drives the organization forward to take it forward. Now from crisis of leadership, we move to crisis of autonomy. The direction phase is characterized by the clarity of strategy and a clear direction for the whole organization. As the organization grows and develops further, there is pressure to delegate power and the decision making to other levels in the organization. There may be power struggles, naturally, between centralized information and decision sources and others in the organization. For example, the leader or leaders may be starved of information. This stage can absorb a lot of energy. So much of energy is lost. If the stage is managed and the power begins to be devolved, this can happen very, very quickly. Problems can later occur, for sure, from a lack of coordination, and that's where the challenge is. So organization can become fragmented and lack an overall strategy, and that's the crisis of autonomy. From there, we move to crisis of control. The bureaucratic machine can begin to establish itself here as the move to the coordination phase occurs. Power is still devolved, but in a more regulated and a proceduralized way, because there are rules, regulation, policies, procedures already. Accountability becomes a keyword. We have heard it from hundreds of organizations. They say people are not accountable, but that becomes a keyword. The controls can threaten to stifle growth and initiatives of the organization. Too many control, crisis of control can actually throttle the organizational growth. It stifles it. Now we move to a crisis of red tape. The organization needs to free itself from the clutter of rules and regulations so that it can deal with its customers. You cannot hold your rules to serve your customers, your markets, and your competition. It's a crisis of red tape. To move to the collaboration phase is risky, right? How to develop a more participative approach without the anarchy of the earlier stages? And that becomes a big question mark in many people who are seeing this inevitable change in the organization. That brings us to the last crisis in this discussion. Crisis of uncertainty. Sometimes at this stage, the organization has grown to the extent that a new and clear strategy and a mission is required, but is missing. If it is missing, then there is uncertainty. Maybe the organization needs to break into smaller subunits. So probably that is why you've seen many organizations do this. They divide into different verticals or so many plants, different plants manufacturing different sets, or in different regions, different countries across the globe. And these subunits or verticals have the autonomy within a clear overall framework and culture. So what is happening? It's a large organization which has evolved with so many units, working across geographically diverse globe. And yes, they need to break into a clear framework, and a clear culture. And that's the crisis of uncertainty. This no organization can avoid. They have to go through. That is why when we talk about change response patterns, it is important to have this background that we gave you based on Ellie Greiner this time and previously based on Eric Erikson. Right now that we have understood the change dynamics from these two wonderful researchers and contributors, let's go in and understand the depth of what happens in the organizational change and how do people respond to it. Thank you. See you soon.
Yes, we're talking about changes. You'll agree that organizational changes, organizational responses to the change, patterns, solutions, is what is the key. We are looking at two important factors, internal forces as well as external forces. Moment you talk about change with respect to external forces, we need to deal with the social, the cultural, the demographic, the political, the economic, and the technological changes, whether we like it or not. As an organization, we have to deal with it. In the business environment, there is the industry, there is competition, and there is consumer demands. As an organization, we need to adjust to that. And not to mention the key, change is also about internal forces. We need to deal with low performance, low satisfaction, new mission, new leadership, and conflict. But good news is we can make the change smoother, we can make the change easier and better. CRP, the change response profile, helps assess your people's concerns in the organization to successfully implement the change. Please feel free to drop in a mail at learning@oscarmurphy.com